Grab some popcorn and a favorite chair. The love of movies is why we're here. Press play and don't delay. Let Phil be our guide to a cinematic day. Phil at the movies, from the silver screen to his podcast stream. Phil's covering every movie dream. Phil at the movies. Phil at the movies.
And welcome back, everybody, to another edition of Phil at the Movies. I am your host, Phil Walsh, and today for a somewhat monumental episode. This is the 150th episode of Phil at the Movies, and I am delighted to be welcoming back a second time guest on the show, Mr. Jay Skipworth from the Film Strip podcast, to discuss a little film by certainly my favorite filmmaker, Christopher Nolan. And before I reveal the film that we'll be discussing today, I want to first just welcome back Jay to the show. Thank you for coming back on the show, buddy.
Oh, Phil, absolutely, man. Had a blast talking those Friday the 13th movies back with you, and then real excited about today's podcast for sure because we've certainly had a lot of offline conversations about this, and so it's good to put it in the record, as they say.
Right. Now, this has been a discussion that has been in the works for feels like months now. So it's nice to sort of have it all uh, come together, so to speak. And for those watching on the YouTube portion, you may have noticed my hand gesture right there. Jay just did it as well. No, this is not some secret society nonsense. We are making reference to today's topic of conversation, and so. In honor of the 150th episode, it made sense for me to want to talk about a Christopher Nolan film. And what better film than I mean, it feels strange to label a Christopher Nolan film a cult film, and that's probably really stretching the expression here because, again, Christopher Nolan is not known for his cult films, but this is a movie that is certainly it generated a lot of discussion before it was released. It has certainly generated a lot of discussion after it was released, and God, we're looking at what, 5 years ago now,
Yeah.
almost 5 years. But in that time, there's been a lot of reassessment, reevaluating, and dare I say, a lot of growing admiration for this little film, this little engine that could. Of course, the movie that I'm referring to is the Christopher Nolan. We'll call it a spin on James Bond, and we'll certainly get into that in the discussion. But the film, of course, is Tenet, if you couldn't have guessed, based on that build up here. So, Jay, let me just first open up with this question. What does Tenet mean to you?
You gave me that as we were preparing for this, and I thought, okay, I can answer that a lot of different ways. I think the fact that it's a palindrome
Mm,
itself is significant because it's the relation that the characters and in some ways the audience have with time in the movie.
mhm,
Because they go forward and backward, because that movie, the word can go either way too, but it's the same either
mhm,
way because as Robert Pattinson says, what happened happened after all.
mhm.
And I think about that, and because we both really like Nolan and have talked a lot about that, and I've spent a good bit of time talking Nolan films with folks through the years. The thing that I really appreciate about his films, and he builds them all to be this way, even if it's something historical like Dunkirk or Oppenheimer, that you are rewarded
Mm.
for investing attention and time and reinvesting in it over and over again. So the more time you spend with it, the more you get from it. And I feel like that's the thesis of this movie is that you don't necessarily have to understand all of it, but and you won't, definitely the first time through, but you can feel a lot about it. And there's a whole character that even has that. And I remember the first time I saw this movie, I picked up on that because I thought Nolan doesn't do things arbitrarily in movies.
Right.
Everything's there for a reason. It's one of the reasons I have him on my Rushmore of directors and things too, because having spent a lot of time with Stanley Kubrick movies, for years, and reviewed them all with my buddy Kurt on Film Strip through the years. Yeah, I see a lot of similarities because even though Kubrick had a lot of different stuff that he did, he always asked a lot of you would if you would invest in a movie, and it would give you a lot of reward back, but you had to put the time in. And Nolan feels that way too. And the thing that I learned about Kubrick through the years was that there wasn't anything accidentally there. And
Right.
Nolan is the same. And so I feel like Tenet to me is that interesting relationship with whether you're going forward through this timeline or backward through it, you're still in that it's still the same space. It's the same thing. It's just a different point of view, looking at it from the top versus from, underneath, if you will, and stuff. And I remember the first time I saw this, Phil, and just being blown away in every
Same.
way possible. Yeah. And walking out of it going, okay, I got to see that again. And it was at that time that it was actually released, like you could buy it
Right.
and go see it. So I bought it and just brought it home and said, must watch this again. And I don't know what the situation was, but I happened to have just some days where it was just me, and I said, okay, I'm just gonna watch this, and I think I watched it a couple of days in a row, just trying to pick up, and then luckily some good podcasts came out, and there's a lot of discussion about it, and through the years there's been plenty. I've been on two, talking about it before, and I still don't know that I have all of it, but that's the fun part about it. So to me, to answer your question, is that Tenet to me is all about that palindromic nature that whether you're forward or backward, what's happening is it happens, there, and it's all in how, um, instead of doing a time travel movie, Christopher Nolan said, "No, I'm going to do a time manipulation movie, and at the same time, I'm
Yes.
going to manipulate the audience too, but you're not going to be mad about it."
Bingo. No, I will just say this is a movie that has probably generated more discussion than, I mean, with probably the exception of the Dark Knight trilogy of any Christopher Nolan film, just the one that sort of there's a lot of passion. People feel very
Hmm.
strongly about this film to
Yeah.
this day. And I remember the first time that I saw it, my reaction was, "Oh my God, I've got to watch this again." But then being sort of delightfully frustrated because, like, it's not a movie that you were going to pick up on the first watch or the
Hmm.
second or the third. Again, I rewatched this ahead of last night, or ahead of tonight's recording, and there was stuff I was still picking up. This
Yeah.
is, fourth, fifth, viewing or whatnot. And it's like that to me is the mark of a really good film where you're going to pick up new pieces of information. And it's funny because I had the same experience when I saw it almost a year ago now, back on the big screen, as well as last night. Every time I rewatch this film, it feels like I am watching it for the first time. It
Hmm.
really does that job of manipulating what is your perception of reality in a way. And
Yeah.
I love that kind of experience because, I mean, most films, even ones that you hold near and dear, I mean, I think of, films like, Jaws, for example, or The Dark Knight or Halloween, which I've seen more times than I dare to admit. But, again, even though I certainly cherish those, but you've seen them, you know what's coming. The
Yeah.
shark is going to pop up, when Brody's chumming, the fish guts. This is one of those movies where even when you were sort of like, oh, okay, this is the moment where Neil and the protagonists are going to confront themselves in the future. It still sort of like catches you off guard in a way, and I love that because, I mean, again,
Hmm.
it felt like, okay, this is the first time watching it again, and I'm experiencing all of these unique twists and turns, and again, I think it's to date. I mean, certainly Oppenheimer is off in its own little little space, but this is probably Nolan's, I think, most ambitious film, just in terms of what he was going for, and the fact that it is still generating all of this discussion and analysis, almost 5 years later.
I think what's neat about it too is that you can see the seeds of it planted in multiple films before,
Mm,
for him.
good
Even
point.
going all the way back to Following, like
Yeah.
there's stuff there, and then certainly Memento
Hmm.
and Inception and Interstellar, and there's even things in like Dark Knight Rises that sort of find their way into here. And then again, and then he's got his Insomnia is kind of the one that sticks over here, and everybody's like, I don't know what to do with that movie. I did say just realize you're the best director going right now. Just directed a remake of a thriller and just enjoy it for what it is. It's pretty good on that level. Like if you can get somebody to do that, like okay,
Right.
enjoy those. They don't come along that often.
Bingo.
And then and then something like Dunkirk and Oppenheimer, they're um it's uses in how characters move, and you see him finding different people that he'll use for things again and again. And he's not unlike a lot of directors where he has people he likes to work with along the
Right.
way. And but this one, has some of those people in it, but it's also got some new folks in it too. And I remember again when I saw this the first time, like I didn't get all of it,
Hmm.
but I understood what had happened. Like I was like,
Right.
okay, we got from A to C to D to F to R to all that, sure. But I understood by the end of the movie what had happened and who the protagonist was
Right.
and what Tenet was as the organization. I mean, and so I thought, okay, for a smart movie that's going to make you work and stuff, if you just watch it straight through, it's like, well, you still kind of get it. It's the by far the headiest, smartest James Bond movie ever conceived.
Right.
And without James in it. And I love that because Nolan himself will say he's a big Bond fan. He would love to do one that'll never let it.
Oh no, no, way too much control would have to be given, and honestly,
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to see him see that ground. But no,
Mhm.
this is the best James Bond movie without James Bond. This is what Christopher Nolan would do with it, and I like that he is able to give us this high concept. You know, the world is coming to an end. We've got to avert World War III. Again, tropes and trappings that you see in any spy thriller, James Bond to Jason Bourne, but yet it's done in a way where it never feels over the top. It
Mhm.
never feels campy. Again, even when you're introducing an organization like Tenet into the fold, and even a character like Nia, who is probably more a little flashier than certainly the protagonist, everything is grounded in sort of a believability. Even Kenneth Branagh's character, who again very Bond villain esque,
Oh
is
yeah.
there's still that sort of realism and real menace to him that again, this is not like the mustache twirl, it's not Blofeld with the cat, like it's a very unique kind of taking of the archetype and deconstructing in a way that would only work in a Christopher Nolan manner. Like, yeah, I mean, no
Mhm.
disrespect, I couldn't see Steven Spielberg doing this kind
No, it's not his
of a
kind of movie.
film, you know.
No, it's not his kind of story or his kind of film, and that's fine because again, I like them because they do different kinds of movies, and even
Bingo.
I compared Nolan and Kubrick a lot because I do think they kind of live in some of the same plane, but they also make very different kinds of movies, and Nolan has yet to make anything like Eyes Wide Shut,
No.
and my thoughts on that are well documented back in that that episode, but not to say he couldn't one day
No.
too, and that's the fun part of it. The thing about Tenet to me that just keeps me coming back to it over and over is that each time I watch it, I try to look at it from, okay, which one of these main four characters am I going to watch this through? Because the protagonist is obviously is the one to watch it through.
Right.
But it's fun to watch the movie and try to watch it through Neil's eyes and watch it through Robert Pattinson's performance. And I'll also say too, because it was a knock on Nolan for a long time, was that his female characters didn't do anything. And I was like, well, he nailed it this time because Elizabeth Debicki's cat is an amazing character. And part of that is the performer. The
Hmm.
other part is the way she's written and all the stuff she gets to do. So it's fun. The last time I watched it, I tried to watch it through the cat lens, which is a neat way to watch this movie.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, no, it's funny. When I rewatched it last night, I really focused on Pattinson's character, particularly
Yeah.
because he has again he's the flashier character, but he really does drive the narrative in a lot of ways
Oh
more
yeah.
so even than the protagonist does, played by
Hmm.
Washington, which again. I think that's a unique because I mean you could just look at okay he's the he's the handler what have you, but again like it just shows you how like you pick up on the information
Hmm.
on the rewatches. I had forgotten at the beginning of the film during the opera house siege that the the guy that sort of jumps in front of the protagonist with a little
Little red
the
tag.
little red
Yeah.
tag.
Yeah.
I completely forgot. Like, oh shit, here we go. All right,
Yeah.
action is
Neil's
already started.
intervening early.
Neil is
Yeah.
already there. Like, and I love that. And I was like, okay, this is really. I mean, it's as much his movie as it is
Hmm.
the protagonist. And again, I think that's the real jewel of this movie is that it really works on one, so many levels, but two, you have all these different storylines, obviously, intersecting, together
Hmm.
during the needed points or inverting, if you will. But even sort of irrespective of that, they all have their own beats to it. Like
Yeah.
again, we'll certainly get into it with the ending, but like, with Neil and his revelations and the way that concludes, just as it does with what's going on with Kat and her dynamic. It's again, it's all these storylines sort of working together and colliding together, but ultimately they go off and sort of, in many ways, spin off into their
Hmm.
own unique narratives, which is again just sort of adds to the layer to it. I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, movies do this, but I think the fact that you have a movie that is so predicated on time and reality and sort of free will, if you will,
Hmm.
that to me is very exciting, and it kind of opens up the door to, I mean, just countless speculations and just okay, or well, what's going on in this moment? Like you're
Hmm.
watching, Cat, but what's Neil doing over here, or what's the protagonist doing, in the corner? I find that just fascinating.
One of the things that I appreciate about Nolan a lot, and he really got good at it after Inception, but in the Batman trilogy, and then particularly this movie, all the press and stuff, everyone would ask him like, "What is this? Was that?" He said, "I don't know. It's you all now to figure it
Right.
out." Like, because I always appreciate artists that realize at some point when they let go of the thing and put it to the audience, it's now the audience's.
Bingo.
And what you decide is what you want it to be, and it can be all of those things. And I want you to have all that. And because he has his own mindset of it, but he also concocted this over a decade,
Yeah.
which you can see why it took him a while to unravel it all. But he wrote it with the intention of I'm going to give you an answer, but how you arrive at it is going to be your path along the timeline. Because what he didn't want to do was, as he said, I didn't want to make Back to the Future 3, where I had people placing things so that all these other things had to happen, so that these other things had to happen, and all they said, and he liked those movies, and I happen to like those movies a lot too, particularly that first one. That's one of the most perfect scripts ever written
Timeless.
and produced in Hollywood, in my lifetime for sure. But and you can have that kind of movie, but he wanted something that was about different stuff. And there's something that is a running theme through Nolan movies that nobody has picked up on, or at least spent a ton of time on. He talks about like the environment and what that is going to look like in the future if we don't make a lot of changes in a way that doesn't feel ham-fisted and beat you over the head with a sign about it. But it's a common theme in a lot of his films. And I just noticed that like even the Batman films, there's a little bit of that woven in there. And I'm like, I don't know, it's kind of neat I tried to describe this movie to my wife after I saw it because I wouldn't stop talking about it, obviously. And she said, "What's it about?" I said, "Well, on one level, it's about these people that realize that we've destroyed the environment to a point that we're not going to make it. So they're going to send back the way that we can fix it. But it gets in the hands of a guy who's the ultimate Bond villain, and he decides, well, if I can't live in the world, then nobody can. And that's a neat construct to think about, like Sator as a villain.
That again, that's what I find just endlessly fascinating about it. Because again, you could have easily done the traditional Bond-esque, Blofeld, I'm just evil for evil's sake.
Right.
And I love that we get the revelation. And FYI, everybody, this will be a full spoiler talk. So
Oh
if
yeah.
you haven't watched the film, I mean, certainly unplug and come back after you've seen it. But I'm guessing if you've been with me this far, and 150 episodes, if you're listening to a show about Tenet, you've probably seen this movie at least once or twice. So you could certainly excuse the spoilers. But I love that we get the revelation that he's dying of cancer, and
Hmm.
I think that just adds such a level of humanity to this character where he's a nasty, despicable guy,
Hmm.
hateful, just contemptuous, just a bad villain. He's a villain. I mean, let's just put it
Hmm.
that way. He is the villain. But yet there is that element of humanity. This
Yeah.
is somebody who doesn't want to go through the pains of dying of cancer and figures, okay, well, if I have to go, you're all going with me, sort of a thing. It's very,
Hmm.
operatic and grandiose, but you sort of understand that kind of like, oh my God, this is happening to me. Why has the world punished me? And then, like you said, technology falls into the wrong hands, and of course, an idle mind is a devil's workshop.
It's the wrong hands, but it's also the right hands for the purpose of the people who set this up because
Being,
it's almost like an Atlas Shrugged kind of thing where
good point.
I could think like wherever they are in the distant future, they're in their bunker ready to ride it out. And then once he does what, he gives them what they need, we're going to trigger this and then we'll come back and rebuild on top like the way we want. Which I mean, that's a theme that I mean has been explored a billion times in films. I mean, think even about something like RoboCop. I mean, that's the
Mm,
whole purpose. Is this company's like, let's just wipe out the old one and build a new city on top of it.
right.
And on one level, it's like, gosh, like even the most but evil villain has a handler. Because he was just a nobody
Yeah.
who took a job nobody else, nobody really wanted because it was the only way out of poverty for him in fallen
Yep.
Russia was shoveling out old nuclear test facilities. And he comes across this bunch of gold left with a note that like if you find this, then we have a job for you. And he kills the guy with him, So he's ambitious. But you get like the villain origin story, and they tell it to you in just these little pieces. And a
Right.
lot of that falls on Kenneth Branagh. And
Well,
I
that's the
can't,
thing.
I can't say enough, man. I've loved that guy since like I saw him in a movie called Dead Again with Emma Thompson from back in the 90s.
Oh.
It's a wild thriller, man. It's one of those that'll mess with your expectations too. I do recommend it if you haven't. I can tell you haven't seen it, Phil, so you need to check that one
Yeah,
out.
need to put that on the list.
I'll leave the spoilers out of it, but he's great in it. And then, of course, I saw all the stuff he did, after and through the years, have watched him, and I always just love his presence on screen, whatever he's doing. And I feel like he gives this villain a. You don't like him, you're never gonna like Sator, and you shouldn't because
No.
he is awful,
No, it's a bad
but
dude.
you get him. You understand him,
That's
and
yeah.
that's what's neat about him.
That's the thing. It goes back to my point. This is not the, black cap, mustache twirler. Oh, I'm evil for evil's sake. Like there is an effort to try to understand the modus operandi, which,
Hmm.
again, in these kind of movies, spy thrillers, save the world escapades, you don't necessarily expect or even appreciate that kind of level of
Yeah.
detail when it comes to the heavy, and that's a real strength. Oh, and one of the many strengths about this film is that the fact he has this one incredible screen presence, but there's also a very compelling backstory, and
Oh yeah.
it's again, it just sort of adds to the stakes of the entire operation.
Oh
And
yeah.
you sort of look at the idea of this being kind of a two-way mirror event where you're looking at society as it is in the present day, and then it's almost a dark reflection of what it is, however many years down the road, post uh, the onset of World War III, annihilation, apocalypse, and that's a really fascinating way to approach this kind of a story, but also just as a commentary on humanity. I mean, you make that point that Nolan really is working with some very interesting ideas and themes in this film. And it's not, one of these things where he's laying it all out and telling you this is what you must follow and this is my whole point and follow the blackboard kind of a thing. It's
Yeah.
not that. It's all subtle and nuances, which again, I think that's the best way whenever you're trying to address heavy topics and themes like this. But it is really compelling because you really do see it as a split in a way where on the one hand, society has completely failed and
Hmm.
just destroyed themselves, destroyed the world around them, and there is that sort of thought of like, well, what if we could do it over? What
Yeah.
if we could go back and sort of reinvent the wheel in a
Hmm.
way? And I kind of like it how this is one of those situations where it's not all right, we're going to go back in time and try to stop, the creation of the atomic bomb and sort of,
Right.
work out,
The
the
grandfather paradox,
exact
right?
bingo.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really we're just going to go back and pick a moment in time in the not too distant past to try and rectify what we have done in the future. And I just find that
Yeah.
compelling because again, you sort of see the real world parallels with kind of a society on the brink and sort of teetering, and it really does put you in the driver's seat in a way where no one is sort of asking what would you do
Hmm.
in that scenario, like how
Well,
would you react.
I think Nolan has been obsessed with this idea of knowledge and power and what you do with it
Right.
is so important, and also the idea that with the more you know, the sorrier you are, it. The old
Right.
ecclesiastical, like the more knowledge, the more sorrow you
Yeah.
have. And what that is about is the idea that the more you dig and understand things, the more you realize how pitiful and pathetic it really is. And it makes you kind of And I love there's that, the Clemence Posey character has the one scene where she's explaining inversion
Oh yeah.
and entropy to the protagonist, John David Washington, with the bullets and
Yeah.
all the stuff. And I've always in my head thought about like in some way, like she doesn't know who invented this technology, entropy, reverse entropy, but we know that the person who did was so afraid of it that they killed themselves
Right.
over it. And I was like, wow. And in my head, I'm like, like, and this is just my own little retcon for the movie, so I'll play this off and see what you think. I think it's her 40 years in the future, she invents this and regrets it immediately. But that the present version of herself that we see doesn't know that. But I feel like she's the one that seems to understand the most about it. And I don't know. They don't ever tell us how far away it is, but it's obviously in a lifetime that figure the protagonist is in his mid 30s. He's got to be old enough and spry enough to still be moving around. So whatever happens 30 or 40 years in the future. I could see it. I don't know. It's just a
Oh,
mild pet theory.
I have chills. That yes, I had not thought about that, but now after again, it's fresh in my mind. She is the only one in that moment who understands
Yeah,
whatever this, and even again, she doesn't fully comprehend the
right.
ramifications, but
But
yet
she's obviously been
she's
doing work
there.
in the field.
She's right there.
Yeah.
She
Hmm.
understands sort of, 1 + 1 = 2
Right.
dynamic. Yeah. Oh, I like that
And
theory. I like
she's
that.
Tenet.
Well,
We
no,
know that because that's how
bingo.
he
What,
gets in the
yes, what
door.
he, yeah.
Yeah, because I missed that the first couple of times I saw the
No,
movie, and then
you're
I've
right.
caught it every time
Yep.
since, and I'm like, oh, she's Tenet. I'm like, okay, so how would the protagonist know to go to her? Probably because he knows she's the one that invented the thing. I always go back to like Star Trek 4, when Scotty and McCoy help the guy at the plexiglass place invent transparent aluminum, and they go, how do we know he didn't invent it? And I'm like, well, I get it. I buy that,
I like that. I'm
Yeah.
sticking with that.
Yeah. And
Well done.
again, I don't know that you need that, but that's just been, again, that's when I say, like, when you invest in things like this kind of movie, and this is what you get from Nolan movies, is it allows you to have that kind of experience with it. And is that right or wrong? He'll never tell us. And as far as, I've ever heard, he'll say, that sounds good. Go with it.
Well,
You
that's
know,
the thing. There's never a throwaway character in a
no,
Christopher Nolan movie. I mean,
no.
the great Michael Caine has a wonderful, I won't even call it a cameo because that's seems to really
It's an
just,
appearance in a
yeah,
restaurant.
yeah. I mean, he has a good moment here. And,
Hmm.
again, talk about, again, not wasting a character, again,
Yeah.
and everybody has either an implied backstory or, like we said,
Yeah.
one that we can sort of create in our own mind. And again, I think that just sort of speaks to the strength of this script, where it is so smartly written and able to sort of pinpoint on the sort of necessity or necessary information in any given scene, but then just sort of blow up the canvas like tenfold, where you're like, oh my God, okay,
Hmm.
like you said, this is her 40 years from now. Like again,
Yeah.
you just run
Could it
wild
be?
with it.
Yeah.
And again,
Well,
who knows?
like you say again, there's any character that has more than two lines is not somebody you need to ignore. You need to pay attention to them.
Right.
And one of the unsung heroes of this movie in terms of actors, I think, is Aaron Taylor Johnson as Eames. Um,
Oh,
when I
yeah,
saw this, it was when all the talk was about like who will be the next Bond when Craig retires because he was going to. Everybody knew that No Time to Die was it for him,
right.
and I was like, that guy, that guy. He's intense, he's buff, but he's cool and
Mm.
he's fun. I've liked him since Kick-Ass, so I'm on his team and will be forever. And people, don't like him. I don't. You just don't understand good acting. He has a great line when they're setting up the pincer movement at the end of the thing, where somebody says something. He says, "It's need to know and you don't." Any other stupid questions? And I'm like, okay, now I have relatives that have been in the military, and that's how they talk. So and they would have been the guys that probably would have asked that actually, but they understand that, and so I get that concept. But that's again not a wasted line.
Right.
Like you can pick away a little bit, but it doesn't really matter. What you
No.
need to know is you need to pay attention to these four people because
Hmm.
and Eames is kind of on the outside of that.
Yeah.
But along with the guy that sets up, the protagonist in the beginning and the Clements Posey doctor
Hmm.
and some of these other folks, Barbara, I think's her name. And but you really are paying attention to Sater, Kat, Neil, and the protagonist.
Right.
And I love that all these things around Michael Caine's character, all these people kind of hover in and out of their lives. Um, you have all of them, and then you have Priya, who's also a major
Oh
character in
yeah.
this, which is a great misdirect. We'll talk about that when they get to her. But to have all of those things, it's these four people that are your linchpins, and you just hang
Right.
on to them as they flow back and forth across this timeline.
Right. Literally.
Yeah, I mean they do. They
Yeah.
all at one time or another go forward and backward across the same thing. Neil goes a lot of ways.
No.
I saw it mapped out once. I think it was Empire Magazine, maybe.
Yeah.
It's a long. I like Neil did a lot of inversion.
No.
Neil can tell you. Well, it doesn't really kill you.
All in a day's work.
Yeah, I mean he knows, but I love that about this movie. Though is again, and there's no wasted character, like you said.
Right.
Everybody's got a purpose, and I watch this and I go like, okay, so obviously Michael Caine's the money guy.
Right.
You got to have a financier. I love those Now You See Me movies, those magic movies. I don't know if you've seen those or
Yep.
not,
Yeah.
but he's in those, and I'm like, you always got to have that guy,
Oh
and
yeah. It's essential.
and I'm like, yep, there's got to be somebody with the money, so he's the money guy. Okay,
Yep.
cool, done.
No.
We'll deal with that, and then and he's got great lines too. But he pops in and out for that. You got Eames, you got to have the military, like the super military guy. That's his job is to get all these other people to go forward, backward, and shoot when they're supposed to. You
Hmm.
got to have the scientist. Okay, we got her.
Yep.
And then you got to have the shady arms dealer too. And that was the first time they did that. And I love the whole like reverse bungee jumping thing, which is a
Oh,
real thing.
again,
Yeah.
I just want to say that's what I love about it. This is not stretch your credibility here like a
Yeah.
rubber band. Like Nolan is grounding this in total reality, but yet it feels larger than life and
Mhm.
dare I say Bond-esque.
It
And like
is. And
like that's a Bond moment.
yeah, and what I love about that though is that Neil tells him he's like it's kind of like bungee jumping, but you're just doing it in reverse.
Right.
But they're going forward through the timeline at that point. But what you realize is like I got to get this guy somehow mentally and physically prepared for the idea of what he's
Of
really
what's
going
happening.
to later.
Exactly.
So okay, this is an object lesson
Right.
for that. And then when they get up there, and of course he's got the guy to the gunpoint, he thinks that's the arms dealer, and then he realizes real quick,
The
nope, it's
switch.
her
It's pretty,
because
yeah.
she's hit the alarm, and then she calls him off
Yep.
because he says the word, and like and you're like, okay, so this movie operates on the old tenet, if I can use that pun for a minute, of sometimes you got to
Well
keep your
played.
enemies just as close as your friends,
Right.
and Priya represents that. We're going to keep this enemy close because the enemy and my enemy now becomes my friend for a
Right.
little while here. until I shoot her in the back of her Mercedes. So
No loose threats.
that was cold. Oh, that was
Oh,
cold.
like I
So
said, that was the moment I was like, I mean, again, it's right, of course, at the end of the film, but
mhm,
like you really see the closing of his circle in
mhm.
that moment, and I mean, we talk about sort of the journey that the protagonist goes on, and just sort of the arc, because
Oh yeah.
it's a again, it's a classic sort of fish out of water story, but with much higher stakes in a way.
Yeah.
Um, I love how the way it sort of begins. It's just another job. It's just
Yeah.
another extraction, and yet everything sort of goes wrong. I mean, first off, that whole opening scene
In the
at the
opera
opera
house.
house,
Oh,
I mean, that is a top five greatest opener for a Christopher Nolan film, and I think would be in contention as like one of the greatest openings for any movie. I mean, just talk about
mhm.
setting the stage and the scope of what this film is going to be about.
Feel the vibe from that. When I watched it in theaters, I feel it every time I watch it at home now too. When I watched that the first time I saw this movie, it felt like I was in the beginning of The Dark Knight again
Ah,
with that
yep.
bank robbery because the music feels the same.
Yeah, you're a good
It's
point.
got that kind of sort of blue sheen over everything. And I was
Mhm.
like, what am I getting? Because I didn't know what this movie was about. I mean, I didn't see a trailer. You know, this was during COVID, so going to a theater was a wild idea anyway. But I figured nobody's going to be there because
Right,
nobody knows what the hell this is.
right.
I didn't know. I was like, okay, I knew who John David Washington was because I'm a big Denzel fan, and
Yep.
I knew he played college football, and so I kind of kept up with him through that. And I thought, okay, I'm sure I know he's an actor, cool, but I'd caught some of his stuff, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'll go watch that. I love Robert Pattinson because I thought he did the best he could with the Twilight movies. They're terrible. I mean, this is not his
He
fault,
tried. He
but I've
tried.
seen him in other
Yeah,
stuff,
no.
and I'm like, you
Yeah.
know what, this guy can act. And I was,
Yeah.
oh, we're gonna make him an action movie star. I'm game. And then everything else was, cherry on top. So I go into this and I'm like, this feels like The Dark Knight all of a sudden again.
Yeah.
Wow, that it felt that way. But then of course it goes horribly wrong, like
Oh
you
yeah.
say. And what I realize now is that, it goes from the opera house to the all the stuff that happens there to then the protagonist gets captured, he does the suicide pill test. I'm like, that's a hell of an elaborate job interview. But
You're hired.
yeah, but I get it too, because
Yeah.
there has to be a proving point. And what's mind-boggling about it to me is this guy, he sets all of this in motion in the future. So this same person. So he's not so much trying out as much as he is doing the things that led him to, okay, how do I make this work now? And that's what's wild about this is because memory is so faulty. Like you can do something and 30 minutes later have a completely different memory of it. Even though you
Right.
just and that's what's wild about this movie is that it relies on the protagonist's ability to remember very specific things that happened in a
Yeah.
specific time.
Well, no, it's like when he is first checking out the the gun and sort of
Mhm.
the inversion of the bullets, and I think he's like I think the line is it's all about instinct, or you just sort of reacting,
Mhm.
and again that's
Yeah.
entirely true, because I mean we go through things in our own lives day in and day out. Sometimes we go, hit of deja vu, or whatnot, or quick callback, but a lot of times it is just simply reacting. It's
Yeah.
it's instinct. It's just sort of, well, why'd you do that? I don't know. I just did it. It
Yeah.
made sense. It felt right. And that's a lot of what you see going on here. Like he can't explain it. It's just sort of, all right, this is the way it is. Like,
Well, and like Barbara told him, because he said, "Well, what about free will?" Then she's like, "That bullet wouldn't have moved if you didn't put your hand there. The
right.
gun's not going to catch the bullet if you don't point it and pull the trigger. Like it's all you're reacting, yes, but you're actively reacting,
Good point. Very
which
good
is
point.
which is really neat to think about. It can give you a headache too, but it's also but because again, you watch this movie and you think, okay, this is the guy who sets all this up, to happen, but he has to have gone through it to set it up. So
Mhm.
it's almost like you have to put yourself through hell to get there. It's I don't know if you've ever seen this movie from 1980 called The Final Countdown. It's got Kirk
Yes.
Douglas. Yeah.
Oh
So,
yeah.
so
Oldie but
the
a
end,
goodie.
yeah, spoiler alert, into that movie, what you realize is that the guy who more or less set Martin Sheen on that boat that kind of set everything in motion for it to happen. What happens is the Nimitz which was the biggest aircraft carrier at the time in the world, gets thrown through a time warp and goes back to right before Pearl Harbor. And then they wrestle with should we or shouldn't we? That's the whole thing. But then they get brought back. But you realize the guy who set all that in motion was one of the pilots on the deck who rescued somebody who got left on an island and saw Pearl Harbor go down. So he has to go it like, ugh, it make your head swim. And I think about this movie is the same way because, and I've never heard him say it, but just knowing enough about Christopher Nolan's taste, he's probably devoured that movie,
Oh,
in his lifetime. And it's
you can
playing
see the
into,
DNA.
yeah, yeah, you feel the threads, right? And that's what's fun about it is you're like, oh, I feel all of that kind of coming into this. And I talked about that rewarding thing. You're also rewarded if you just like movies of different kinds. You're going to find their DNA in Nolan movies. He's going to
That's
give you those things because you should be rewarded for watching that kind of stuff and enjoying it.
Well, no, I mean you made the point about Back to the Future,
Yeah.
and certainly this is no Back to the Future, folks. If you haven't seen the film and are expecting this to be Marty McFly going to try to rectify his parents getting together,
No.
this is not this is not it. I can promise you this is not an updated version of that classic tale. But what I appreciate is that you still have those elements that
Hmm.
we sort of take as sort of stock, for a time travel movie, but yet obviously the stakes are much higher here. We're dealing with you know, post, end of the world and trying to, reverse engineer, human behavior. But it's still at the end of the day, like there is that element of time manipulation, and that to me
Hmm.
is always fascinating, particularly when you're interacting with yourself, past, present, future. And again, this is, nobody's making out with their mother in this movie. So, there's
Yeah,
none of,
yeah, no, it's
none of that,
but
folks. But, it's
it's
that
not
sort
only
of
time
like,
manipulation.
it's like a, WTF, like, oh my, like that's
Mhm.
me, but yet like he's doing it one way, but yet I'm trying to reverse it in a totally different fashion, hoping for another outcome. I just find that is such a roadmap to just sort of endless possibilities. Because I mean, again, we've
Hmm.
all had these thoughts, like oh, if I could go back, if I could just tweak this event here,
Hmm.
X, Y, and Z would follow. And again, Nolan's able to do it in a way where in a lot of ways, we are just going along for the ride. I mean, you can try to stop and take as many notes as you want for this
Yeah.
film. Don't do it because you're going to miss the ride. And, and
You miss
and
the
this is
fun.
that's the
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Part of what makes this movie work so well is it is just the experience of it. I mean, I call it the
Hmm.
ultimate vibes movie because you really just have to feel it. I mean, again, that's the
Hmm.
line in the movie. Don't think about it, just feel it. And certainly that happens, every time I watch it. But even the way the characters are reacting, like when the protagonist sort of in inverts for the first time, and the idea of like you're gonna have to put on a mask because you breathe differently when you're doing, like
Hmm.
that's just such a cool concept because you
Well,
you never
it is
think
cool.
about
Yeah.
that, like in time travel movies, like it just sort of
Well,
it just, oh, we went back in time, no big deal.
I mean, the first time he inverts is right after that highway chase. He has to go and relive that highway chase
Yeah,
again, which I, the elaborate practical mixed with CGI effect in this movie is it's
it's
Nolan.
mind
It's just
blowing.
what he
Yeah.
does. But it's awesome to see. And I remember just again watching this movie the first time and I'm trying to get it and I just realized at some point I'm just gonna have to be on the ride and it's the
Right.
roller coaster that goes up and down and I'm just gonna go. And when I saw that scene roll back and I thought, holy smokes, how did they do that? Only to be topped later when you realize he has to go fight himself because we've already seen him do it
Yeah.
and then you see him do it in reverse, and then you find out that like that's not the film rolled backward. They taught each other how to fight backward,
Yeah.
and I was like, that is insane.
Yeah.
Like, but that's Nolan,
Well,
and
again, that's Christopher Nolan.
yeah, but we talk about the movies about time manipulation, not time travel, right?
Yeah.
Because what happened happened. It's just we're influencing the things along the way, but it's going to work out. It's all going to go. This is going to happen, but we can influence the outcome because we can change the little stuff.
Right.
Well, the four main characters are manipulating each other all the time.
Oh yeah.
You know, um, Cat and Sator are constantly manipulating each other.
Hmm.
and both versions of Cat, the inverted one and the forward one. Neil is there to purposely manipulate the protagonist because you've got to get him to do stuff. And I love their whole little walk and talk when he's talking about how he wants to get into the art thing, and he's like, "You want to crash a plane? Don't be so dramatic." Not while it's flying, and I love that whole like outlay, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that's such a just good play, and you can tell that they had good chemistry,
Yeah.
and it's just fun to see. And it's neat to watch actors get around other actors they can play off of and do stuff with, right? But if you think about the manipulation again, like everybody here is manipulating somebody. Like Sador thinks he's manipulating all of it,
Oh yeah, he
you
thinks he's the
know.
puppet master.
And he shoots Cat with the inverted bullet because he knows that's going to derail these two idiots because they're going to be more worried about her, or at least he will, And then Neil's like, well, okay, we can do this because I got to do this. I also have a theory that I'm not alone in thinking about why he's doing that, but we'll come to that in a bit. But he's still trying to keep the mission moving. They're still
Yeah.
trying to do this. And then Kat is the one that really throws the wrench in the thing when she's already talked about how she's pissed off at her husband because she saw this other woman diving off the boat in Vietnam,
Right.
not realizing that was
It's
her.
her. I know.
Yeah, after
Yep.
she shot it,
Yep.
And so that, all that happens. You see all of those things happen. And then when you realize at the end that the ultimate manipulator is the protagonist. When he shoots Priya is when you really realize you're like, holy cow, he gets it. He now at that moment is when he knows like I got to do this because 30 years from now when I found this thing, I got to make sure that that's a loose end that's not here anymore. So,
No, and that sort of ties back to my point about his arc as a character. Again, he is responsible. And again, I love how the movie gives you those hints along the way, but it really saves it for that ultimate
oh
payoff
yeah.
with Priya in the Mercedes, right when he decides to end her life, so to speak. But again, he starts off as this fish out of water. Okay, what is this? What is Tenet? Like it's
Yeah.
just the classic, all right, I'm going along for the ride because, that's what I'm trained to do. That's my
Hmm.
job. I stop problems. But yet the great irony, he is the true mastermind. He is the manipulator, as you say. And it's you sort of it's in that moment and his acting in the film, I don't think gets enough credit
Oh no.
because again, a lot of times people think, oh, these movies, it's just, a simple, spy thriller, what have you. But you're dealing with a lot of heavy themes here and situations. And for a lot of the film, John David Washington, he's just observing. He is not, he's participating, but a lot of times his character is simply observing kind of the situation, being on the periphery, being the eye, if you will. And then a lot of times he's just reacting to
Mhm.
the craziest situation that has sort of unfolded. And, you watch him sort of go from the uncertain, okay, I'm in way over my head, to then, of course, what he's willing to do, again, throwing himself, through inversion, without cause, without fail. Again, all, paying off beautifully at the end where he does realize, yep, I am the protagonist. I am the organizer of this entire
Mhm.
affair, and I love that because you really do see this is my purpose. Whereas at the start, he's just sort of he's kind of he's a cog in the machine, if you will. He
Mhm.
just he's there to do a job, but by the end of it, he is this he is this player. He is somebody who is sort of he's got the world the not to draw on too much of a Spider-Man reference, but the power of the sun in the palm of his hand. I mean, that's
Yeah.
really the way it goes, and it's again, it's sort of it's amazing, it's frightening, but it's also in a way it's kind of reassuring with this film, particularly when you see characters with, duplicitous angles and sort of, backstories and twists and turns that, someone like that kind of, tying into, Nolan's themes about, putting too much power in the hands of somebody, at least when you're looking at it, through that lens, this is somebody who is not going to abuse this power. This is somebody who is at
Yeah.
least, understands the ramifications and, kind of has gone that full circle and realizes, you know, just how guarded and how careful you have to be to avoid these types of things sort of spilling out and in this particular case, ending up in the wrong hands, as of course it did with our friend Mr. Sater.
Well, it's like we've talked about before. You even saw that in the Batman movies, particularly Batman Begins, where you see Bruce's story gets told in flashbacks and forward
Hmm.
flashes in that movie, right? And it's to show us that he had to go to a really dark place and almost make the worst mistake he could have made to then go and throw himself away from the world so that he could figure out how do I deal with this and become something else, right? And then we see what comes out of that. And the protagonist is on a similar venture here, especially in the first part of this movie after, he meets Neil and he's told all this stuff and they're just going through the whole, okay, we're going to steal this piece of artwork because it's so neat. Talking about Cat and Sater again. Kat had her lover make that Ford's piece of art, and Sater bought it, knowing that he knew that, but because he bought it, she knows he knows now, and he can hold it over her because they would both be exposed for frauds at that, and that would ruin her, and she didn't want that, and it would out the other guy. So there's all that. Going on, and I mean, you get that great scene at the restaurant. I don't know who came up with
Oh,
that line. Like, I ordered my barbecue sauce 30 minutes ago, and then he just whips the hell out of everybody in that kitchen. And it is some of the best like fight choreography in a small space I've seen in a long time. I don't
mhm.
watch a lot of Hong Kong action movies. I understand this is a lot of what they're all about. Maybe I should because I love the frenetic energy of that scene and how everybody expects him to be thrown out half dead, and it's the other way around, you
Mhm.
know.
And it's not over the top.
No.
This is not, you know, uh, again, no disrespect here, but it's not John Wick.
Hmm.
This is
Yeah.
simple. Again, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about sort of that grounded reality to it, but yet it still has tremendous payoff.
Well,
It's
it's
still
good
it's
Krav Maga.
entertaining.
It's just yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. It's just good hand-to-hand combat, and but it's entertaining as hell.
Right.
That's what's fun to watch is we haven't really seen this guy go at this point, and then we do. So when he has that fight later, when we see it both ways, forward and inverted, we understand like
Yeah.
this guy can fight that way. And you see the guy shoot at him, which you realize later is like I'm trying to unarm the gun. You
Right.
know, it's like because I don't want to shoot you. You think I'm trying to shoot you, but I promise I'm not. And that's what's so neat about watching this and getting it from both ways. Because this movie is really, if you just lay it on a timeline just by itself, it's actually kind of small. Like there's
Mm,
there's like four things that are happening, at all the time. We just get to see three of them in reverse. So it
right.
gives you seven scenes instead of four. And that's what makes it so like, oh, trippy.
Yeah. No, that's the thing. The canvas gets expanded, and
Hmm.
that's, I think, again, one of the reasons that I just keep going back to this film because you said it perfectly. You were only dealing with a handful of scenes, but yet, again, each one sort of has a tremendous payoff, but yet at the same time, we get to see that reverse. We get to see the flip side of it.
Uh,
Um,
I'll give you a
which,
movie that does this too,
yeah,
Phil, and it dawned on me after I had seen Tenet a few times, and then I just went through these series of movies. When I came along and watched Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban again, I had forgotten about the little time manipulator that Hermione gets in that movie and how it plays through the story and how they do the same thing
okay.
that they do
I had
here.
forgotten about that.
And
Okay.
it hit me. I was like, oh, just like in Tenet. And I think I even said that out loud. And my wife was like, "What?" And I was like, "Don't worry about it." She still hadn't seen Tenet, and so I was like, It's the same thing. It's the same idea." But it hit me, and I was like, "Oh!" But it made me. I understood the Harry Potter thing much better because having seen Tenet a few times, and then when I watched Tenet again, I was like, "Okay, so it's just like the little time widget that Hermione has. You just got to think of it like that. That's what the turnstile is." And I was like. That's
That's
weird. I mean, it opened it up
Oh,
for me in a
that's
neat way.
wow. That well done, Jay. I did not expect us to weave some Harry Potter into this discussion. So
Oh man, yeah. So yeah,
there's a major point there for all the Potter fans. But
yeah. Well,
oh
I
my
mean,
God,
yeah. You talk about one of the original film strip like long series was the Harry Potter movies way back in the
way
early
back in
days
the
of this
day.
show. Yeah, way back. So, and I love a lot of those movies, and particularly like that one. And I think everybody loves that one. Most of everybody I talk to loves that third one. But it works the same way. And so when you think about it like that, it's like, okay, I'm really only seeing the same few scenes. This movie's not that complicated. It's there's four things you got to know. You're just going to see three of them twice, and once you know that, it's okay. Now I can follow it.
That's the thing. I mean, again, I always hate to sort of get on that soapbox and be preachy, but like again, I will definitely sound like a film snob here, but I don't think this movie is that complicated. Like,
Mm-mm.
yeah, I really I think like if you just sort of watch it for what it is,
Mhm.
again, don't be thinking 10 moves ahead. This is not three-dimensional chess here.
Yeah.
Just watch it for what it is, and one, you're going to be entertained, but two, it really is. I think pretty straightforward to follow because it's again, it's a handful of scenes and then just the reverse, which
hmm
that's again, I don't think it's that complicated. Again, I'll probably get pillaged in the comments for
No,
that,
yeah.
but
Anybody who does is thinking too much about it. It's not. It's not. That's the thing, and
people
actually
overthink it.
that's the brilliance of it, is that it's not that complicated. Like, I I'm gonna make a wild reference here, but this movie is like Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. All right. Now, yes, I have done the link up with Wizard of Oz. It's a wild coincidence, y'all. But it's fun to do if you want to do that. But just as an album, just that like 50 minutes, just as it is, has got so much going on in it.
Hmm.
But you can't just put it on and just listen to it. And
No,
you're like, and I mean, there's reprises. They come back and forth, because that's what these guys, they're genius musicians. But they're also just, I mean, they were just writing a story about being a successful rock band, and the record company constantly going like more hits, more hits,
right,
and they're like, okay, fine then, while they're also having that very English
right,
response to stress and all the other stuff that Roger Waters had going on in his head. And I heard Richard Wright, the keyboard player, say it once. He said, "You have this very," and he said, "Yeah, I mean this in respect, this very angry, very staunch, person with opinions out front, and then you have the two most melancholy people in the world playing music behind it, him and David Gilmour." And he's not wrong. And it
oh
gives
no,
this neat wave through it. But this movie works a lot like that. Like you can listen to Dark Side of the Moon and just listen to it and be like, man, that was cool, very nice. Or you can sit and really listen to it and go
right,
like, oh, is that sound? What is that sound in the background? What is that? And you can start picking all the pieces apart, and it
hmm
just unravels it more. It doesn't make it worse. It just makes it more fulfilling. And Tenet's the same way. If you just watch it as a straightforward, it's a real smart action movie.
right.
But and a thriller,
Mhm.
then you start watching all the other pieces of it, and you're like, oh, this is so much more. It's
It's
got
so
all these
much, yeah.
layers. That's what makes it fun.
Oh no, again, we're certainly in that camp where just
It's
like
like a
the
choose your own adventure book, but instead of
yeah,
choose your own adventure, you are watching the chosen adventures.
right. No, that's a good. That the hard part's already done for you. No,
You don't have to decide what timeline you're on. You're on the timeline.
it's your
You just have to watch them work through it. So,
one and only timeline. No, I
yeah.
like that. I
But that's
like
what I
that.
like about it, is that we're not inventing alternate reality here. We're changing the future by making sure the bad thing doesn't end up in the hands of the people that shouldn't have it.
Right. No,
That's all we're doing.
that's the thing. That is not that complicated, folks. That is not that complicated. We've solved the we've solved the riddle right there. Um, I mean, God, there's so many scenes in this film. I mean, certainly the moment at the airport the first
Mhm.
time,
It's awesome.
and I mean this certainly gets a lot of discussion, and it has over the years. The fact that, and again, if you've seen the movie, you might think quickly, if you aren't steeped in this stuff like Jay and I are with the behind the scenes and the making of it, but you might think, oh, they probably just use CGI or a miniature plane. No, folks, that was a real jet.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
drove that right through that building. They blew it up right there on set. That was not if there is some computer graphics, it's surface level details, but the plane itself that is crashing through that
Mhm.
building, that is the real deal. And I mean, again, that is just a testament to Christopher Nolan as a real filmmaker. He does as much as he possibly can there in camera on set, but just that whole scene itself, it's probably one of my favorite moments in the entire film because you have sort of the build up to it. You've got the nice back and forth with Neil and the protagonist about what they're going to do to get into the little
They're doing
storage
the Ocean's
locker.
11
Yeah,
K-Stat thing.
that's
I
right.
love that. I love when Neil's walking around and he's like, "What about the water? Oh, it's gas. Oh," and he's
Yeah,
just he's just picking it all up. I'm like, I love this. I just need Brad Pitt over there with like shrimp cocktail.
right.
Same thing going down. But I love a good heist movie. I'm a big sucker for a good heist movie. So on one level, this movie's a big
Oh yeah,
elaborate heist movie, and I love that. I think that's why I like those. Now you see me movies, they're heist movies.
right.
Caged in magic. And I love that. And what's wild about the Freeport heist is that you realize they do all of that and they get all that, the plane crashing, all that stuff, and then they use the same thing and shoot against it on the other side to have
Right.
Neil, the protagonist, and Kat run back through it so that they can run her through that turnstile
Yeah.
and reverse the damage of an inverted bullet that
Yeah.
Sanders shot her with. Because they're like, does it work? I don't know. Let's give it a shot.
Right.
And makes sense, right? But that's when you realize that, and it's all in the acting too, because Robert Pattinson gets in a fight with a guy and he pulls his mask off and he looks stunned and you don't know why, and you
Yeah.
realize later it's because he just fought himself.
Right. No,
And
we get the payoff.
yeah, he didn't know that. He was like, oh, I don't remember, because he has no memory of that, right? Because it was
Right.
happening to him.
Yep.
So that it's neat to see that, because you get to watch the same scene, but then you get to watch it from the other side. And
Exactly.
it's the same with that highway chase. Is you see that crazy stuff go down, and you're like, "Who's the person in the inverted car?" And you realize, "Oh, it's the
Wait. Oh
protagonist."
shit. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
No. Again, that's where when I go back to I said the payoff in this movie, it's just incredible because, like I said, you're watching essentially the same scene, but reverse. And again, it's not like they're not flipping the camera, obviously, and not flipping the scene. They did all this stuff in set, which again, that's practical, details aside. But just from a visual storytelling exercise, and just from a visual experience, it's marvelous. I mean, you're just again just to watch it all play out, and then of course when that car, to sort of piggyback on that chase on the highway when the car flips and then Sater comes over and drops the lighter on the gas, and then of course it doesn't blow up, but instead it's the inverse where I think
freezes him.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think Neil's like you're the first man to survive an explosion and go into hypothermia.
exactly. But again, that's the kind of thing that this movie rewards you with by watching it several times, because it'll give you that. And the set pieces are what make this so cool. The way that it's set, that car chase by itself is awesome. I mean,
Mhm.
you got fire trucks
Oh
and
yeah,
semis on the, but then when you see the protagonist go, okay, I'm going to invert and go back and fix this because I just lived it, so now I can go the other way. And they're like, how do I drive a car in this? I don't know. You got to figure it out. you
right.
know and he's like, okay, so right should be left, left should be, you can see him working it out, and it's why that car is so erratic. And I don't know, it's neat to see that you have that set piece. But the other thing that I love too is that that's the one that like has an immediate, like, hey, I can go right back now and do it. But everything else that they want to do, they have to wait, right? Because with Kat, after she's healed up or whatever, they have to wait a week on that ferry boat that's going backwards. You don't
Right.
catch that the first time, but you see it now. It's like have to wait on that so that they can catch up to the other side again. And you realize the time is passing because they have to wait to get back around to when it happened.
Well, that's the thing. Again, in most of these types of movies, it's sort of like, all right, we're going to push the button or, step through the magic portal and boom, we're back 5 minutes later or, you know, hot tub time machine. It's all very like, okay, it's easy, easy peasy. And no, again, the movie takes its time, its time, if you will, to show us and take us through this journey. That's a perfect example with the inverse boat, where again, in inferior hands, if you will, that could have been an easy. All right, we'll just take care of it like we
Well,
did with the other stuff. But yet, again, Nolan's in a league all of his own. Again, I will
yeah.
continue to gush about him, but like that's just another sort of added layer to this film where it's like, all right,
Mhm.
this isn't like we can just sort of wish our way, back into the scene on the boat in Vietnam. We're gonna actually go through this entire time lapse, and it's again, it just sort of adds to the ultimate payoff of this movie.
No, it's what makes it great. It's why that end battle scene at Stalk's Trail 12 is
Hmm.
so cool because you've got people that are going forward and people are going
Oh,
backward through it, and you see a building get shot from underneath and on top, but in
oh,
reverse.
it's
That is
It's
one
so
of the
cool.
best effects in the movie. And I mean, I remember when I saw that, I was just like, did I just see a building get, kneecapped and decapped at the same time, but like put back together? That's
I
pretty wild.
I remember the first time I watched it at home, I had to like, because when you're watching in the theater, your mind is just completely
Yeah.
taken aback by it. But I said, okay, I have to pause this, get it home, pause it, and like, wait, did that really you just have to like take a moment to like catch your breath because
Mhm.
it is so mind bending in a way, but it's mind bending on the screen, and then you're sort of putting it together in your own head. It's like, wow, they actually did just that.
Oh, it's one of the coolest things, the way that they pull that off. And again, a lot of great models, a lot of practical stuff. But you also realize something that has a big payoff in that scene is that the block that he learns about inverted bullets from came from that battle scene.
Yes,
And it's
yes.
like,
That was a
oh,
nice little Easter egg.
that's pretty wild. You see it. It's like,
It's
now
all
I get it.
there.
Yeah, I'm
It's
like,
all
oh,
there.
well, again, no wasted movements. To go back to my Pink Floyd reference thing, the way those guys recorded that stuff and did that, there's nothing in there arbitrary. There's no
Hmm.
wasted motion, no wasted, notes or wasted sounds and stuff like that. It's all there for a reason, and you get what you want out of it, but they put it there in that order for a reason, and the way they play it is for that reason. And this works very much the same way. That piece of music that lays in there like that,
Hmm.
that effect happens for the same reason. It's what's neat about those set pieces and being able to bounce from those. We don't go back to the opera house,
Right.
because it's a one-time deal. We get twice through the Freeport, twice we see the Vietnam thing, and then twice at Stalls 12. And that's what makes it wild. And of course, the highway chase, like we talked about. And that's what's cool is they introduce that idea to you in small pieces until it gets to the big one. And that's what's so neat about this movie, I think, is just as an action movie in terms of the way like you're putting something together. If you want a big set piece, you do the small version, then you do the medium version, then you do the supersized one.
Right.
And that battle at the end is the supersized version.
Oh, just a little bit. No, that's the thing. It's the perfect kind of cake movie where it really does build, or I suppose this way it sort of inverts, if you will, with tremendous payoff. And just as a sidebar, I mean, I love the fact that we've covered both Harry Potter and Pink Floyd. I mean, again, lot of ground being covered here tonight, everybody. So you probably didn't expect that
I look,
on
look,
this episode.
you open up the pop culture menu with me, you're gonna get that. That's how my brain
Hey,
works.
I appreciate that, Jay. No,
Everything connects,
that's
man. It's,
that's right.
it's
That's right.
at least it is in my brain. So yeah,
Hey, there's Tenet for you right there.
yep.
Um, I mentioned one of my favorite scenes, and I was certainly there's another one that I'll save and we can certainly talk about towards the end. But what are some of your favorite moments in this film?
I love the reverse jump moment and the
Yeah.
meeting with Priya. I love that. I love the whole setup of the art heist and how that happens. I talked about the kitchen fight and stuff as part of that too.
Hmm.
I'll tell you one of my very favorite ones is when they're in the inverted boat and they're having that conversation with Kat after she's been healed, and they're telling her like, okay, you can't kill him until we say it's okay,
Right.
because we got to have the algorithm, we got to have it all of it together, because if you do that beforehand, it's going to alert everybody, it's going to set things in motion. And you can see it on Elizabeth Debicki's face. She's like, I hear you, I'm not going to listen to you.
Right.
Yeah. Like, and she plays it along for a while. Her and Kenneth Branagh on the boat at the end there when she does finally kill him. I love that scene because
Oh,
it's her really taking action and control and trusting that it'll work out.
right.
I love that idea because they haven't said it out loud other than that one doctor said don't overthink it, just feel it a little bit. But you got to take some things on faith.
I
You
was going to
know,
say that's another beautiful theme with this
yeah.
film, and that crystallizes that whole concept perfectly.
Yeah, and those are some of my favorite pieces in this. In addition to all the big, the action scenes and stuff. But I like the stuff when the actors get to do stuff with each other. I just find that fascinating to watch people work and to realize like what I'm wondering like what did you tell them to get that performance, or
Right.
did they get that on their own? It's that's kind of fun to watch.
No, that's the thing. I mean, again, a lot of these types of movies generally I feel lack that sort of character development and sort of interplay between the actors where most of the time it's sort of just reacting to whatever set piece or situation, that's larger than life, but we sort of move from A to B without much forethought or consideration. And yet this film takes its time to both set up the characters, but then to actually give them something to do. Like again, it's not all right, we have our problem, we have our situation, but yet we're going to get a lot of interesting dynamics and sort of interplays with these characters as opposed to just sort of reacting to set pieces and running around like chickens with their heads cut off. There's a lot more nuance and sort of depth to these characters where they kind of, I mean, they obviously they further the plot, but they also give us this own kind of interesting insight into who they are, and certainly it's a testament to the cast because everybody here is bringing their A game.
I think the ultimate part of that is at the very end when Eames, Neil, and the protagonist are standing there with the pieces of the algorithm, and Eames is like, "I'll kill you if I find you, but you're not going to look real hard." You don't know that, and he walks off because that's just how the badass. That's what he does. But I love how
James Bond.
that's when that moment you can see because he's almost tearing up. Like John David Washington is realizing, like, wait a minute, you just stepped in front of a bullet for me 10 minutes ago or 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
That's you. You were in the opera house and I've just gotten to know you, but now you're gone. But Neil says, this is an end for me, but it's the beginning of our relationship, and you see like, oh, we've known each other a long time, and when he's unveiling all that and you realize like Neil hasn't been completely forthright because he couldn't.
Right. No.
He's carried that heavy, heavy burden. But the way Robert Pattinson plays this, and again, I don't know if this was him or if it was Nolan telling him, he plays it off with such a smile and such a like sense of duty. Like it's not, it's just how it is. Like he's just
Right.
sort of, and that is such a neat, nuanced piece of that performance that you realize that like I've had to build a relationship with someone that I've considered to be a mentor and a friend for years, but who didn't know me
Yep.
until now. But that's okay. And he's dead,
Right.
but I'm okay with that. That's pretty wild, man.
I think that is my favorite scene in the entire film. I mean, one, you have the revelation, and it's again sort of where everything comes into focus for the protagonist, and of course it plays off beautifully with the final scene with Priya, where he's again closes that circle. But just from both an acting standpoint, I mean, Washington and Pattinson are really just sort of giving it their all. It's a very emotional scene with not a lot of heavy exposition. It's just enough where we get a picture and a sense of this friendship. And yeah, I always just sort of have to, laugh whenever people say, "Oh, Christopher Nolan writes such cold, detached movies." I mean, again, I think it's complete nonsense, but this is the moment where I always point people to because you want to talk about a scene that's going to pull on the heartstrings. I mean, just listen to Pattinson, watch John David Washington, and just his reaction, like realizing, like, oh my God, like I have known this guy for so long, and we've been friends. He's willingly sacrificing himself. Like it's beautiful, it's poignant, and it's again, I think a perfect example of why Christopher Nolan is not this sort of detached uh, you know all business writer director. I mean, there's some real heart and drama here that I think really elevates this movie as opposed to just being, oh, it's a simple spy thriller, time
Yeah.
manipulation movie.
Look, yeah, I've used Pink Floyd. I'll use them again. When people say to me like, "Oh, all Pink Floyd, their best stuff was all this like super political and just protest music," I was like, "Go listen to Shine On You Crazy Diamond. That's not what that's about. That's about their friend that's not there anymore."
Hmm.
Like that, like they, you want, there's a lot of heart. I was like, wish you were here. That's about their friend who's not there anymore. It's also about them who couldn't stand each other anymore. Like that's the only way those guys could work that out. But that's what I say when people say, oh, this is too cold. I'm like, no, it's not. It's cold maybe from your perspective, and it's
Right.
cold from like Gary Marshall or Steven Spielberg's perspective. But it's not the way Christopher Nolan operates in
Bingo.
dialogue. Like if people talk about Inception being this cold movie, I'm like, that movie's all heart.
Yeah.
Like Leonardo DiCaprio is operating on pure emotion almost the
Right.
whole movie. I was like, that's kind of the point, you know? And
Bingo.
yeah, I said, no, 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 that is an excellent scene, and um, I'm getting chilled up just thinking about it, because again, the part about Neil that I just love is that he knows he's going to die,
Right.
or that he has got to do something I mean, he has to know that,
Hmm.
and he's not mad about it. He's not bitter because he kind of looks at the whole of it.
He
One, it's
looks at the
the
whole picture.
yeah, well, it's the esoteric. Like I know what I'm doing is for the greater good, but also like, look what I get to do along the way.
Well,
You
no,
know?
he says that as he's getting ready to to run off. It's like, you and I, we get into a lot of great stuff. You're gonna love it. Like it's just he's
Yeah.
very like nonchalant, like
Hmm.
I'm just here for the ride type of deal.
Exactly.
We probably all could use a little bit of Neil in our own lives,
Well, I mean,
honestly. Like,
yeah, it's why a lot of people theorize on the internet, and I happen to kind of believe a little bit in this theory that Neil's just Mac, the little boy, Stater and Kat's boy grown up, and you can
I could
play with
see,
that to get
yeah,
there. But I can kind of see it. I'm like, the protagonist keeps a very tight circle, right? He can't let a lot of people in. Why wouldn't it be? He's going to a really prestigious school. His parents are both geniuses.
yeah.
You could see it, that he would be like, let's make sure that this guy does these things, learns these things, and that they have that relationship all these years.
No, I sort of subscribe to that theory because again, I think with Nolan, nothing happens by accident, and that's a yeah. I think I'm with you on that one.
And
I'll plant a flag.
it also, it's why he would go along with the let's invert cat to save her. That's his mother.
Right,
Well, one, she can't die, but also I can't let mom die. So,
right,
not here. So, okay,
yeah,
and that, I mean, that all of the way that they play off of each other. There's a time when John David Washington walks back into like the container after they've done the inversion with her, and the way he's sitting by her, and then he kind of sits up and sort of moves away.
right,
And
yeah,
I'm like, oh, you don't want to let on,
yeah,
but you can almost tell because there's that scene, and it again, we see scenes from two things. Elizabeth Debicki just makes a random phone call outside of his school one day, and we don't know why. And later we realize that she called him, she called the
yeah,
protagonist to go like, I don't know, this car looks funky, and
yeah.
he's there, and he's waiting, and he knows, and so it interacts, but the way he looks at them when they walk away, it's like I'm going to be a part of these people's lives for a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah. No, I have the same reaction every time I watch it, which I mean again that's just the beauty of this film. There's just so much again, like we said, you could watch it for the ride, just have a great time with it, but you can really unpack it and just I mean just have a treasure trove of theories and ideas and spin-offs for it.
Yeah, I mean that's the fun part about a movie, even if you've seen it 100 times, like Jaws, we
Yeah.
both have that in common. You can watch it again from a different character's point of view, and you pick up on little things, little nuanced things throughout the way.
Hmm.
But this movie, and Nolan movies in particular, rewards you, particularly the heady ones. And I would say like Memento, Inception, and this one sort of all live in that same pile together. And Interstellar too, even though it's
Hmm.
about different stuff. Is that the more you rewatch them, the more you pick at it and pull it apart, it doesn't unravel it. It makes it a much bigger tapestry. And
Right.
that's what's kind of fun is the more you play with it, the bigger it gets. It's neat. That way, the snowball just gets bigger the more you pack onto it.
I have to ask because I mean certainly I don't ever expect this to happen, but it's kind of a fun what if because I certainly have an opinion on it. Would you ever like to see a sequel to this film?
That's a
I know
good
that,
good
that
question.
yeah.
Hmm. There's been talk about it. I know Nolan has said that he doesn't know that he's done with this universe, you know. Um, what would what it would be, I can't fathom unless it's going to be the protagonist in the future and all this. You know what I mean? Like, I on some ways, I'm like I want to go back and revisit these people in this world, but on the other hand, I feel like this movie is its own contained sequel. You know, you can revisit it itself. So I'll come down on the side of like I'm intrigued, but no, I really don't. I think I'm good with it being a one-time thing.
See, I was that way for a long time. I thought, it's right here. It is contained. You can look at it from many different angles, many different vantage points. But I don't know, the last few times I have revisited it, and this was even more clear after last viewing, I feel there is so much more that we could get with just the dynamic between Neil and the protagonist, where I mean, he certainly hints at, we get into a whole bunch of other stuff. You're going to love it. You could just make an entire movie on just that basis alone and decouple it, if you will, from this trajectory. I mean, I feel like you could really maneuver it in a way where it itself could be its own contained story.
Can I give you a side spin to that?
Yeah.
I would watch a Neil movie
Oh.
where the protagonist just was a figure who came in and out. You know, it'd be the wild part. You get Denzel to play the protagonist, like the older
Oh.
protagonist. Just he's just sort of there and then he walks, but Neil goes and does. I would watch a Neil adventure as a side adventure.
Oh, I kind of like that idea. Oh, I
You'd
kind of
have
like that idea
fun.
more. I think, yeah. No, I mean, Neil is, I think, probably my favorite character in the movie. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, Pattinson is having clearly a ball with it, but again, there's so much more to it. Like, I mean, he's the fun character. He's sort of the one that the audience sort of goes along and he's sort of like the Han Solo.
Well, he knows the most. Next to
Yeah,
Sator, he knows the most. You know,
I think there's a lot you could do with his character.
yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that too. He does have a little bit of that Harrison Ford, Han Solo, you know, kind of
Swagger,
swashbuckler.
yeah.
Yeah, he's got swagger to him, you know, and he's just he's fun and he's clearly having a good time. And I would watch a Neil movie all day. So
Well, let's start manifesting
yeah, so
that.
just speak that
Put that
into the
out there.
world.
Yeah, a Neil
I don't know,
movie.
man. Nolan's got so much stuff coming up that he's working on.
I
This
know that's right.
Odyssey thing is going to
Uh,
be
no,
unreal.
don't get me
So,
started.
yeah,
We'll be here till next year. No, I mean, this is a film where I feel like we've only just like cracked the tip of this iceberg. Like, I mean, I know we joked about it off air. I mean, you could do 5 hours worth
yeah.
on just the first act alone, and it wouldn't be enough. I mean, this is just such a wonderful jigsaw puzzle of a movie where everything just sort of connects, but then you're like, oh, I could flip it this way, and maybe this piece actually fits here. I mean, and it just takes you on a riverboat ride of multi adventures, multi timelines, which I mean, I get a kick out of that. Um, before we wrap up here, I had asked you the question at the start. What does Tenet mean to you? And I will close it with, what do you think Tenet means in sort of the broader terms of the movie itself, what Christopher Nolan was trying to say with this film? Certainly a multi-part question there, and take as much time as you want.
Yeah, I come back to what I started with and what I think the central premise of the film is like you can't time travel. You know, it doesn't work that way. But you can have perspective on how you're moving through things and what's happening,
Mhm.
and realize that there are forces at play that you're not a part of, you know, and sometimes you just have to take it on faith and go with it and go with your instinct. And if you are working toward the greater good, it will work itself out. over
Mhm.
time. I think about the biblical story of Job, and the part of that everybody remembers is all the trials Job went through and all that stuff. But I'll tell you the part that has always really spoke to me is the very, very front of that story. The front of that story is a conversation between God and Satan, and it's more or less a bet, you know, on I can make this guy, turn away from me. Okay, you just can't hit him. Okay. And then so this idea of like there's a whole conversation happening that Job has never let in on, never knows that that happened, and is never told that even when he has a conversation with God at the end of the story. And I think about this movie some of the same way is that there are things going on, you have no idea what your role is or where you're part of it. But if you are moving forward, continually moving forward, and you try to do what's right, it will work itself out. You may not see it for a long time, but it will work itself out. And I think Nolan is at his core an optimist. He believes in the better part of human nature and that we have problems and we fight and we lie to each other and all this other stuff, but ultimately it will work itself out because what really matters is the circle around you that you can do something about. I mean, go back to Inception. What he's always said about the end of Inception. Does it matter if the top drops or not? He doesn't care anymore. That's the point. Dom doesn't care anymore. He's willing to, if it's a lie, he'll just go with it, you know. And that's the same with this, is that the more you spend time with this, you can get caught in a lot of different avenues of it. But in its core, it's about good people doing what's right and it working out in the
Mhm.
end. And I think that there's a neat optimism to that. Even in the Dunkirk story, the Tom Hardy pilot in that movie knows he has no bullets and gas, but he still keeps fighting until the very, 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 very last second when he can't anymore, right? And there's a great shot of him standing there on the beach when the soldiers are coming to him and he's burned his plane up. And he's like, that is literally all I had,
Right.
and the idea that like, okay, but that's going to work out, and I see that throughout Nolan films, and I still feel that even that the nod at the across the restaurant at the end of The Dark Knight Rises, which a lot of people thought, oh, that's fan service. I was like, no, that's earned over three movies,
Right.
and I feel the same way about Tenet. To wrap that up, is that this has always happened. What has happened will happen, right? And they can't change what's happened, and they're in a loop, but they're influencing the loop for the best outcome possible. And I love that idea that like you can't really you and I, Phil, can only change so much, right? I can't redirect a whole river, but I can make the little stream I walk in every day as clean as possible and get it to the right folks. So I'm just going to concentrate on that. And if we all do that, the greater good works itself out. I think that's what Tenet's about.
I think that is beautifully said. I will co-sign everything. I will add two bits to it. I think this movie really, at its core, talks about the role that each individual has to play, sort of big and certainly small. I think we all had this at times grandiose view of, oh, I am the most important person. What I do will, move mountains and the world will be better. And I mean, you even take a look at it from the 30,000 foot view, even that isn't necessarily true. I mean, can one person dramatically change the world? I mean, those are really once in a generation occurrences. It really is a bunch of factors sort of moving together or moving without anyone being aware and just sort of happening. There's the line in the film, and I'm paraphrasing it, but I think it's Neil saying it's the bomb that didn't go off. That's the one that has the most power. That's the one that's the most danger. And that's the one that can change the world. And we sort of always look for the headlines. We look for the big splash or so and so was this hero and triumphant return, but yet nobody sees the stuff that goes on behind closed doors. Nobody cares about the bomb that didn't go off. It's only the bomb, of course, that does go off, but yet the one that doesn't go off, to tie it with that line, that could be almost more dangerous than anything, but yet no one's going to know that. No one's going to know if someone, you know, to paraphrase it, no one's going to care about a fire that was put out that made no headlines. It just sort of it happens. But I think that's ultimately what this movie is getting at is that it's not just about the big things and sort of the big splashy pieces that make the front page news or garner the most likes on social media or TikTok follows or something. It really comes down to just sort of each of us being our own protagonist and working out in our own way things for the better, things that we can control in our own circle, and then just sort of at some point not throwing our hands up and saying, well, I can't do anything, I don't care, but just sort of acknowledging what's happened has happened, what will happen, and sort of come what may. And some people may think, oh, that's very pessimistic and downtrodden, but I mean, that is really how society has functioned forever. I mean, it just you sort of have to take a leap of faith sometimes and just sort of trust that everything ultimately does work out. And if you want to sort of get down to the nitty gritty, it's sort of things going on behind the scenes that we'll never know about. And that's what I think really this movie shines that light on is that it's not about oh my God, to sort of piggyback it with The Dark Knight Rises. This isn't Batman flying away with the bomb and sacrificing himself and being this great hero. This is just about people that you will never know, people that you will never see, doing heroic and larger than life things, but yet never doing it kind of in that grandiose superhero saves the day fashion. Just sort of, it's a carrying on because it's what has to be done and it will always be done.
It's not all that dissimilar from the basic ethos of Men in Black, and I
Yes.
mean, a much different take of
No,
things,
but good
but it
point.
really is. Yeah, it's just that, and Tommy Lee Jones has that whole thing in that movie where he talks about like a person can understand things, people together are scared and dumb and, make bad decisions. And what they don't know is more important than what they do. And we just operate in that shadow. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I can dig that as a premise. And this movie lives in that same idea. And that's what makes it so much fun is again, you can just watch it for what it is and
Right.
get a lot from it, or you can really, get into it like we do and enjoy it. And I think either way it works. I'm so happy though that, and I think as years go by, it will continue to get that approval from people because they'll realize like, oh, there was a lot going on in that movie.
I'll tell you just as a story, when I saw it last year when it was re-released for that week-long engagement, I kid you not, it was a sold-out theater. And this was a Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock. I think there was a football game going on at the same time, and the fact that it was a sold-out showing was not lost on me. And again, it was certainly you had your Nolan diehards. I was right there with the t-shirt and whatnot, but like it was more than that. This was a diverse movie going audience where again I think in a world where COVID had not happened, I think probably people might have found this movie sooner. I mean, I suppose on the one hand, maybe COVID was sort of the blessing for this movie because it sort of allowed people to find it, gradually over time, and maybe that ultimately has been the best thing for it. It's one of those movies where you have to go along the journey, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm delighted to see more and more people finding it and having that reaction to it, even if they are frustrated and angered by this movie, because I mean, there's still a lot of passion on that side of the argument. But I I think you're exactly right. As time goes on, more and more people are going to, sort of enter the world that is Tenet.
Yeah, I think so. It's one of those that will gain traction over time because it's not all that dissimilar from the Prestige, in the Nolan verse. I think the more you the more I've gone back to that movie, the more I really like it and appreciate it. And I often tell people, I'm like, you want to go pull one out of the Nolan bin? Go watch that one.
Hmm.
Like, and just be amazed. Like you'll see threads of all the later stuff in there. I said, but you'll also see just if you just want a good like thriller, it's a good like little page turner, and it's fun. But there's so much going on in that movie, and it's got a lot of themes and stuff too. And that's what I love about his stuff is you can take it on face value and just have the thing, or you can do it like this. You were talking about seeing it in a theater versus watching it at home. The last time I watched this, I watched it on my computer with my headphones in. And I caught all of the dialogue and all that stuff because Nolan's all about natural sounds.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes you catch words and you don't. And I love that though. But what I've appreciated about his movies is that that's how it is when you're talking to somebody at work or when you're doing stuff in a noisy place. It's
That's
it's
right.
very real. It's not sanitized. And it also says that like not every word matters. Sometimes you just got to go with the action, you
That's
know.
right.
Yeah, but if you want that experience and having done it, I'll say it's very rewarding because you catch so much stuff. You're like, oh gosh, they're laying it out for you in a lot of very specific ways. So
Oh yeah.
the early critiques of this movie was like, I couldn't understand what anybody was saying. Nobody said anything that seemed to matter. I'm like, no, they did. It's just natural sound, and your ears are attuned to it. But yeah, I'm glad to hear it was a packed theater though when you got to go back and re-see it. That makes me feel good.
And I can confirm. I wish I had had the foresight to video it, but everyone broke out into applause at the end. Now that might have been it's over, get me to the door. But no, I mean I was certainly on my feet cheering. But I mean again, Christopher Nolan could make a movie about the phone book, and I would cheer for it. The slogan or tagline for this movie, I believe, was "Time runs out," and I can confidently say time has not run out on Tenet, and I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But Jay, any last thoughts? Anything you want to get off your chest about Tenet? I mean, I fully expect we'll revisit this at some point. There'll be a 10-year re-release down the road. So.
Yeah, I look forward to that as well. But no, I really appreciate the avenue to talk about it with you, and I've learned so much again. I feel like this just enhances it. When the first time I saw Inception, I knew immediately I needed to have a conversation about that movie with
Mm,
somebody. The first time I saw Crimes of the Future,
mm.
Cronenberg movie, I knew I wanted to have a conversation with somebody about it, and Carmelita and I had planned that already, and just that podcast is us working that movie out for each other
Love
as
it.
we're doing it. But and I feel the same way about Tenet. Anytime I watch it, I'm thankful to have the opportunity to have a conversation with somebody else who not only appreciates it but sees things in it that I don't see,
Mm.
because that's how you learn. And I really, really dig this and just really thankful to you for giving me the opportunity to come and geek out about Tenet for a while.
Well, the microphone is always open, Jay. So again, this is your second time on the show. So yeah, you're one of us now. Like I said, the recognition and mugs and whatnot will be in there, and as we get you up, third and fourth, return, other plaques will follow, and have a a microphone with your name on it, so you look for that in the mail.
Um,
But no, Jay, honestly, I really do appreciate you coming on, and I have been wanting to cover this film for a while, and just worked out perfectly with the timing, and I was glad that we could just geek out on it because I knew you had such an affinity for the film like I do, so this was an absolute pleasure for me. I again. I feel like we just cracked the code here. We could only this is like part one of 10 at this point. So
could be,
I'm
yeah.
sure we'll have another follow up down the road. But Jay, where can folks stalk you on social media in the best possible way? And of course, please give a plug for your wonderful show, which certainly, if you are not listening to Film Strip Podcast, I would encourage each and every one of you who follows and listens to this show to give them a follow because they do fantastic stuff over there. I did a future show. I won't drop it for you. I will save the suspense, keep everybody in suspense. But they really do just wonderful wonderful deep dives and reviews, and I feel like I don't mean to step on your moment, but it's definitely, if you are a fan of movies, do yourself a favor because Jay and the crew certainly know what they're doing and what they're talking about.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. It's very, very kind. We have a good time over on Film Strip. So, Film Strip podcast on everywhere you can find podcasts. We're even on YouTube now. You don't see us because nobody wants to do that. But we joke we are the podcast definitely made for radio. But no, you can hear us there, Spotify, Apple, all the other places, and we are 400 plus episodes in at this
Wow.
point, and so a little bit of something for everybody in there. And we've had a lot of co-hosts through the years, some of which still bounce back and come back on the show, but it's mainly me, Ron, and Lindsay these days. And we'll bring in our friends like you and Anthony from Tis the Podcast, and Misty and Kendall from Two Girls One Crypt, and several others to pop on and off to talk movies and stuff with us. Carmelita, who I mentioned earlier, it is on and off the show a lot, and sometimes makes guest appearances in fun places. I'll tease that what that might be in the future here. But yeah, we're also on social media at Film Strip Pod. So you can find all of our stuff. And then if you want to follow me on social media, it's at Ran here because I post about sports, running, or some movie that I'm obsessing about at the time. But I'm on Instagram, the Shelf, Twitter, Blue Sky,
Yeah.
all those places. But I post stuff, and I am on Letterbox too. I don't put reviews on Letterbox. I will throw star ratings out there because I feel like writing something just counteracts what I would say about it. So I would
Mhm.
read, and I don't sometimes want to try to remember what did I review that as on Film Strip 10 years
Right.
ago. So I just put but if you want to see the stuff that I'm watching, some of which may wind up on Film Strip, a lot of which won't. You can find me on Letterboxd. It's the same. It's Jay Rain here as well. And Phil, thank you
Oh
for
no.
being a part of this. And you've been on Film Strip before. You're going to be on a couple of upcoming things we've got on Film Strip. I'm having you on with
Looking
our
forward
friend
to it.
Anthony to do one of our session shows. I'm excited about that. And you are going to be a part of a cool series we've got going in 2025 called Double O Film Strip. We've taken a single film from each era of James Bond, and I had a different guest come on each time and review that with me and kind of talk about that era of Bond. And then I'm going to have all you guys on one big Bond roundtable. Those will release, starting in the spring and into the fall this year. So in addition to the usual stuff you get from Film Strip, that's going to be going this year too. So, but thank you again for being
Oh no.
here and for let me have this avenue to talk about this cool movie, and also just for the great show you do. This is a must listen every week for me, and I really appreciate the time.
I appreciate that, Jay. And before I let you go, I meant to ask you this at the start. Since we are in 2025, what movie, and you can have more than one, but what are you most looking forward to this year?
Oh man, that's a great question. I'm a big fan of those Mission Impossible movies, so
Okay.
I'm here for that last one. I want to see that. I'm gonna go to the second part of Wicked because I'm just curious as to how they're gonna pull that off.
Right.
I because it's a 2 hour and 45 minute musical, so and I know what the second half of that story is, so I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, I'll see it. I love the first one. I thought it was well done.
Yeah.
So I'm down for that, and there's I, there's a movie coming out in February by Oz Perkins called The Monkey.
Oh, you're
That
speaking my language.
yeah, I will watch Oz Perkins do anything because
Yeah.
he has hit them all out of the park for me. Black Coat's Daughter is one of my favorite things
Great
that
film.
I can thank our friend Corey McCullough really introduced that to me just on a Twitter exchange, and I watched it. And I was like, holy God, how did I miss this movie? And so I've seen everything the guy's done since. Long Legs was just in my top end of last year, and
Love it.
yeah, and but yeah, when I saw the extended trailer for that, and I even saw his little teaser for it. I was like, I'm in.
Yeah.
Say less. And I went and pulled the short story and blew through it from Stephen King. I'm like, okay, obviously they've kind of taken some liberties with that, and I'm okay with that. Yeah, I'm down for anything Oz is going to do. So I want to see that. I'm into that one, and any good scare thing I'm going to go for. I think Christopher Landon's got a movie coming out called Drop.
I saw the trailer for that today.
That looks like a lot of fun. I
Yeah.
like Happy Death Day and Happy
Yeah.
Death Day to You and some of his other work, and I that kind of stuff like I'm gonna go for. I mean, I like my big franchise movies too. Superman is gonna be a part of my summer, and I will
That's right.
probably spend a lot of July in a theater watching that movie because I that is my favorite comic book character.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
and I'm not a big comic book person, but that's the one that I spent any time with. And as far as like comic book movies, I've seen them all multiple times. I joked about it on Film Strip recently that I feel like they've only really got it right maybe like 1.5 times, but I will watch all of them anyway because I don't care because I love Superman as a character, and this looks like a return to the fun, whimsical parts of Superman that I feel like I've missed for a while. So I'm excited about that over everything.
Agreed. No, agreed. I think that is perfectly said, and you and I are in the same boat when it comes to the monkeys. So
Yeah, that's gonna be a good
definitely,
time.
yeah, that's yeah. I mean, it's Oz Perkins, and I mean, entering the mind of Stephen King. So we're in
Yeah,
for a treat. But
yeah.
yeah, no, I just was curious what your films were. Certainly, as we're entering, we're that part of the year where it's still early, but things are starting to happen. So
Hmm.
I'm expecting it should be another good year for movies. But I'm sure we'll have you back on soon enough, Jay, and we'll talk. I'm sure we'll weave in some tenant discussion at some
Oh
point.
yeah,
Yeah,
always.
we're not done yet. We're not done yet.
Hmm.
That's reality, as
Hmm.
Neil says. But in any event, everybody, thank you as always for tuning in. Again, special thanks to Jay for guest starring on this, the 150th episode of this show. Special shout out to him, his podcast, and of course, thanks to you, the listeners, for just putting up with me each and every week. I hope, again, if you haven't had your fill today, again, I'll be back next week, and we will do this all over again for the love of movies.
Feels covering every movie dream. Feel at the movies makes every movie